So we've just read John 18, and if you're watching this, you can go back to the questions for chapter 32. At the beginning of that, I read John 18. If you've just watched it and now you're watching this, you don't need to go back. You've just heard the whole thing. So we are now at late Thursday to early Friday, the waning hours of Thursday, somewhere give or take midnight. It's very late at night before Jesus is going to be crucified. And so after Jesus finishes that prayer, that high priestly prayer, the one where he prayed for himself, his disciples, and all future believers, we don't know for sure where they were at that point, but at some point they followed him to Gethsemane. And Gethsemane is across the Kidron Valley. There's the Kidron Brook there, across the Kidron Valley to the Mount of Olives. So here's the Kidron Valley, here's the temple, and they made their way from there up to the Garden of Gethsemane, which was a place they'd been many times before. They often met there. They often slept there. And so I'm going to show you some more pictures. Now these drawings are looking. It gets a little bit confusing because the drawings are facing north, are looking north, and then the pictures are looking south. So you've got the temple on the left and the Mount of Olives on the right in these. But then when we look for the pictures, now you've got, oh, where's the temples on the left? Okay, we're good. We're still looking north. No, we're not. Yeah. So do you see that road down at the bottom? And next to it, it's actually dried up at this time of the year when the snow melts in the mountains. Then it comes down and there's running water in there again. So that's the Kidron Valley, and then the Temple Mount is just to the hang on. Yeah, these are looking south. So to the hill to the left is the Mount of Olives, and the hill to the right is Mount Moriah. So you see the Mount of Olives on the left, and so I know it's backwards from the drawings. And obviously the temple isn't there anymore, and so you can't see it. But that big hill is the Temple Mount. So they would have come down from that mount and crossed the Kidron Valley into an olive orchard, which was known as Gethsemane, which means olive press. Gethsemane means olive press. So now we're back to facing the other direction. And this is the Garden of Gethsemane as it appears today. This is the very place where Jesus was arrested. And it was a favorite spot, as I said, of Jesus. It probably didn't look like that, a groomed garden, right? But it is the same place. So so as I mentioned, it was late at night, early in the morning. The disciples were sleeping. And maybe they assumed that they were all going to spend the night there. They didn't know what was about to happen. I'm sure they felt this air of heaviness. But Jesus took Peter, James, and John farther into the garden and to pray with him. And of course, they fell asleep. They kept falling asleep. But it was late, and Jesus knew what was happening, and he knew that they would fall asleep. You know, it's interesting that there are two gardens that are prominent in Scripture. The first is the Garden of Eden, and the second is the Garden of Gethsemane. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. Because in the Garden of Eden, Satan began the battle of the ages that would continue on. And in the garden, he tempted Eve. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus begins to work to overcome what Satan wrought and what sin wrought in the Garden of Eden. And so these two gardens are kind of waging war against one another, but Jesus will win that battle in the end. So your book takes this story and puts it in like a 4-act play. I don't exactly understand it as a 4-act play, but we'll walk through this. We're going to walk through the first 3 today and on Monday, and then the Act 4 will be in the next lesson. So the first thing is the betrayal and the arrest of Christ. The first act is the betrayal and the arrest of Christ. So Christ's agony in Gethsemane was just the beginning. It had just barely started when Judas arrived with this multitude, with this group of men and soldiers to arrest Jesus. And it says that they brought a Roman cohort, which could range in size from 200 to 2,000 soldiers. So they brought this huge group of soldiers to arrest this one man who didn't even resist them. They were making certain that this time Jesus wouldn't get away. And so they brought all of these soldiers. They brought Levitical policemen. They were temple policemen that came, and members of the Sanhedrin, many armed with swords and carrying lanterns and torches. I don't know if you've seen this, but I'm picturing this huge group like in Beauty and the Beast, when they've got their lanterns and their swords and they're going and they kill the beast. And that, I know it's kind of silly, but that's kind of what this was, this huge group of people to arrest this one man. And Judas was leading them. One of his disciples was leading him, and Judas walks up to Jesus and says, "Master," and then he kisses him, which was a typical greeting for friends. But Judas wasn't exactly a friend of Jesus. And Jesus said, "Do you betray me?" Yes. And so here's what it says in verses. Yep. Then Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him, came forward and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to him, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell on the ground. So it's almost like this Marvel movie, right? That Jesus says, "I am he," and boom, they all fall over because of the power of who he is. Look, he could have escaped right then. They're all on the ground. They don't know. They are incapacitated long enough for him to slip away. But he doesn't. Why? Why doesn't he run away? This is his chance. Yeah, he didn't want to. He knew God's will, and he was in line with God's will. He didn't want to run away. He knew he had to drink the cup the Father had given him. It's kind of funny to picture them all lying on the ground in a heap, and I'm sure they thought that he would run away, but he didn't. And then he instructs I don't know if this is. Yeah, okay. So then it says Jesus captured the enemy. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given to me?" So Peter misguidedly tries to protect Jesus as if he could. It is Jesus who protects Peter. Surely, had Jesus not healed Malchus, Peter would have been executed on the spot. So he is protecting his disciples. Well, so he says, it should be up here, but he says that, look, you're looking for me, so let these men go. So he protects Peter by healing Malchus. And then he protects all of them by saying, take me, leave them alone. And he surrenders himself voluntarily. And so he knows exactly what's happening. He said, no one takes my life from me. I lay it down of my own accord. And this is more proof that that was the case. So again, he is protecting them. And his concern for his disciples is evident when he tells them, let these men go. And that is set in contrast to Christ's defense of his disciples. Is their attempt to defend him. They are not going to be able to offend him or to defend him from them, from the people arresting him. And Peter, thinking that Jesus needed help being defended, makes this misguided attempt, this pitiful attempt. But Jesus was the one that was doing the protecting. So that's Act 1. Act 2 is the trial before Annas, Caiaphas, and the Sanhedrin. So Annas, with this first trial, by the way, all of the trials were illegal trials, even by Jewish law, they were illegal. There were not to be trials at night. Why? Because they would be hidden, and trials were supposed to be open procedures, but this one was not. So Jesus is going to be tried 3 different times between the time he is taken from the garden, probably midnight or later, to about 3 or 4 o'clock, very, very early in the morning. And the first thing they did is they bound him and they led him to the house of Annas. They know where Annas' house is in Jerusalem, and these are the steps to Annas' house. It's a steep steps that from the valley down below upward to the upper city of Jerusalem. And it's in the proximity of where Annas and Caiaphas lived. Now, here's the deal. Annas was not the high priest. He was the former high priest. His son-in-law, Caiaphas, was the reigning high priest. But the fact that Annas takes the lead here shows us that he was the one that had was more powerful of the two. He was more powerful. He was technically no longer high priest, but he was more powerful than the actual high priest, his son-in-law, Caiaphas. So here's another picture. These are possible remains of the high priest's house. Obviously, those tables were not there all those years ago, but this very well may have been Annas' house where Jesus was arrested. I thought I had more pictures there. Maybe they're coming later. So Annas was an old man by this time, and he'd been high priest like 20 years earlier. The current high priest, as I told you, was Caiaphas, and he was Annas' son-in-law. And so even though Annas was the head of all, was no longer high priest, he was the head of all religious affairs in Jerusalem. He had the real power. And Caiaphas was kind of a figurehead, even though Annas didn't hold any official position. He was still the more powerful person. Now, we can't know this part for sure. This may be true, it may not. but it's said that he was very rich, which he probably was. But that wealth came from the practice of selling merchandise in the temple. That he was one of the people that was selling things in the temple that Jesus cleared because of that. And so if that's true, and we don't know for sure that it's true, then he would hate Jesus even more because twice Jesus cleansed the temple of that, and so that may the disruption of his business may have made him hate Jesus all the more. But again, we don't know this for sure. Certainly, he takes a prominent role in the plot against Jesus and the arrest of Jesus, and that's probably why they took Jesus to the house of Annas first. Now, part of the reason they took him to Annas is to allow time for the members of the Sanhedrin to gather because they couldn't have a trial without the Sanhedrin. So it was probably a stalling tactic to gather the Sanhedrin, say, we've got him, we've arrested them, we need to have a trial. So next, then, we go to Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. So now Caiaphas is before him. But here's the deal. It wasn't legal to try a man at night. So this is an illegal trial of Jesus. And so they're going to hold another court once the sun rises. But this particular may have been a formality, but it is illegal nonetheless. What happened at Caiaphas' house? So first, the high priest asked Christ about his disciples and his doctrine. That's where Caiaphas House. And we'll read the rest of this. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered him, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in the synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who heard me what I said to them. They know what I said. So they ask him about his disciples and about his teaching. And of course, he says, we've been over this. And when he says this, when he says, why do you ask me? Ask those who listen to me. A jailer that was standing by him struck him in the mouth, punched him in the mouth. And he says, is this how you talk to the high priest, thinking that Jesus was being disrespectful to the high priest? I don't think Jesus lost his temper or his composure. I think he challenged what was unjust, and he spent his whole life challenging that which was unjust. So there's 71 members of the Sanhedrin, and they were all sitting in a semicircle in front of Jesus, ready to condemn him. So while we're not getting to that yet. So John doesn't record this fact, but the members of the Sanhedrin were hard pressed to find a charge to lay on Jesus. We know this from the Synoptic Gospels. They brought in witnesses, and all of this was obviously illegal according to Jewish law. They brought in two witnesses that testified against Christ that lied about that testimony. Is that allowable in any court of law? No, not in any fair court of law, right? They had bribed them to lie under oath. And then they had witnesses that these witnesses said that Jesus said, I will destroy the temple that is made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another one without hands. Is that what he said? Not exactly, right? He said, you destroy this temple, and I will rebuild it in 3 days. But do you remember what he meant by that? His body. You destroy this temple of my body, and I will raise it up in 3 days. And so they were giving false testimony about Jesus. And Jesus was quite silent, which is also prophesied in the Old Testament. And they demanded that Jesus speak, but he just looked on in silence. Um, and they demanded that he confirm that he is the Messiah, and all he said is, I am. And that was enough to anger them and to lose their composure. And they jumped to their feet and they tore their garments, which was a reaction of great grief in their culture. And they said, what need do we have of any more witnesses? This is blasphemy. And we've all heard it. And so they were so enraged that they lost all composure. They struck Christ with sticks. They spat in his face. And they hit him from behind and said, prophesy, who is it that hit you? I can't even imagine what was happening here. This wasn't done by ignorant people. This was done by the leadership of the Jewish faith, the leadership of the temple, without regard for the law and what it said about trials. And their behavior shows the worst of humanity toward this innocent man. Now, these are pictures of Caiaphas house, um, and they would have to wait until morning to go see Pilate. So it is possible that this is where Jesus was. There's a jail under Caiaphas house. It is accessible only through this pit, and this is from the underside. And Jesus maybe spent the night in that pit waiting for the trial. The pit was filthy. There was human waste and mud and stench that was suffocating in that pit. And it is quite possible that Jesus spent his last night on earth, the last few hours before he would be crucified in total darkness in this pit of hell, quite frankly. You can now, when you go there, go into the pit. They built steps so people can go down. And of course, there's no longer the excrement and the mud. But there are, from ancient times, crosses carved into the walls, which would seem to indicate that this was a place that was venerated from very early on. I can't imagine even the suffering that he went through as he lived. He knew the outcome, but he also knew what he would suffer. And that was a very difficult kind of suffering all on its own. Let me see where we are here. Yeah, we're just about done. So we'll stop there. We'll pick up here on Monday.